I give you a little intro. My name is Jakub. I'm CTO of Intergalactic, which is building HydraDX and Basilisk parachains. You can find me by these names usually, Jakpan, that's what you see on the table. Yeah, so why the hell is CTO telling you about UX? Because it's not only about end users. So I have 15 years of experience of building products and experiences. I was studying electrical engineering and computer networking. I was heavily into gaming. And as a first job, I did a complete corporate management project too. So for 200 people. I built lasers, strobes, speakers. I worked a lot with hardware, bikes, and wallets. And I organized some few events. And in the end, I ended up in a startup which was called SaferPass and did password management as one of the first employees. And this was actually where I touched all of the parts of the product, and I understood how important it is to actually have a good APIs and have a good interfaces, because people will not use your product if it's not good. So after I found out about Bitcoin and Ether, I was really interested into building something decentralized, but I didn't really like Ether because how easy it was to break something and how many people started doing it without knowing programming. So we started Galactic Council at the Progress Bar Hackerspace 3 years ago with Kubo, and we were thinking what to build in Polkadot ecosystem. And back then there was only staking, so we just built a node validator node monitoring tool and saw how the infrastructure works. And since then, there was only Polkadot.js for exploring the node's data. We built API Explorer as a side hustle to make it easier for devs to look up for the data. But then we didn't continue with the grant, and Hydra was born. Hydra is a new model for AMMs. It is much more capital efficient, but that isn't the point of this talk. We created a Basilisk as a POC for AMMs and NFTs, and then yeah, I'm here. So let's try to compare EVM to Polkadot. So what I think EVM is a very amazing prototyping tool. It is very fast to build the first apps on EVM, but the problem is UX is very scary, both in the development way and also in the user way. So if you know these kind of things from Ether, you probably know, like transaction fees, crazy. You're giving permissions to some app for all of your balance. Why? I know. So EVM brought first time to users the notion of irreversibility of transactions. So if you break something, you cannot take it back. And this is good, but then something like DAO hack happened, and everybody noticed that it's not as easy to build these quick decentralized applications, and it is not as easy to audit, and it's a very simple mistake that you can make, and the irreversibility of transactions suddenly becomes a nightmare. It got reversed in the end. Yeah. So it taught people about secure setups, which is very important. I think until crypto was there, most people didn't care about security at all, because they could just call their bank and like, oh, I fucked up, sorry. Yeah, and it brought MetaMask, which I think is one of the best and worst things that happened to user experience in crypto. Yeah. So, what's the difference? On Polkadot, you have a lot of applications, different ones. Sorry, in Ethereum, and it means that you are competing for the block space. That's why we are seeing a lot of L2s, and that's why the transactions are at some point when NFTs are minted crazily, very expensive. So the question is, are rollups enough for everything? And I don't think so. So let's look at Substrate. So Substrate is a generalized blockchain building framework, and it can enable you to customize transaction speed for your use case. Sometimes you don't need 12-second blocks. Sometimes you might want 20-second blocks because you want to do something much longer and you need more computation and you don't need a fast response. But sometimes you need 3-second computation, and Substrate allows you to customize that. You don't have the congestion of the chain because you are building a parachain and you can model what is important on your chain. So you can, for example, prioritize liquidations over some NFT transfer means or anything like that. Then there is the transaction cost as a side effect of this, but the thing is you can also model this. You can have no transaction cost at all if you make sure that your chain is not spammable. So this is very powerful for user experience. Yeah, you can adjust almost anything. You can swap the consensus layer, you can swap any part of the substrate and create completely new experience tailored perfectly for your use case. So, as I said, you can reorder the transactions. You might want to do this when you want to prevent front running, for example, on some type of transactions. You might want to prioritize, as I said, liquidations over something else so that LPs are protected. You can pay your transaction fees in any asset that you want, as long as you have a logic for it. And there is a little thing that I think everybody should do is if you allow multi-assets on your chain, you should be allowing users to pay the fees in these assets because it greatly reduces the UX barrier. What we did is on a first creation of any account on our chain, the asset that is transferred to that account is set as fee payment asset, so a user doesn't need to do anything. He just sends money from other parachain. The account automatically sets the fee payment asset to the asset that user transferred, and he can continue doing any transactions on your chain. And this is really powerful thing, and it greatly reduces the things that you are bridging, and suddenly you cannot do anything because you send something to some account which doesn't have transaction fee payment assets. So you can do automation. For example, if you have a treasury on your chain and you are collecting this transaction fee payment to a treasury, you can say that you want to automate rebalancing of it. I don't want these assets. Every 100 blocks, get rid of it. It can be done through XCM. It can be done on-chain if you have a DEX. But yeah, you can do a bunch of stuff with it that you couldn't normally, and this is also very, very powerful. And then you can build a protection mechanisms, which I think we really should do. And we should put more care. What we can and should do in these things is, for example, looking at the flow of assets, like volumes, and monitoring the ecosystem and see if some event happened. So for example, you can use oracles on your chain to see if there is a huge outflow of some assets to other assets and say, oh, hey, there is something happening. In last hour, there was 100 millions of assets being sent elsewhere. We should do something about it. And you can automate these processes, rate limit, or do anything you want, really. And in the end, onboarding. This is a great UX barrier right now, but we are making it better, and we can still make it better, and this is also a pain point that we have. So we can also do user profiling and incentivization. So you might want to gather KYCs for some institutional application, or you might want to incentivize user to do something for you as a parachain. So you might pay users for dusting your accounts. So you have really small amounts on some accounts that are existing in the storage of the chain, and you just say, okay, you can take this amount if you flag this for deletion. But it's very hard to build a chain. It's not exactly easy. And you should consider if you shouldn't use smart contracts instead, if you are prototyping or building a POC, because you need much bigger team to keep up to date with the substrate and its updates, and also the technology is much broader. You need Rust developers, you need front-end developers, and you need developers that can do somewhere in the middle, because normal front-end developers cannot work with the substrate or any of their frameworks. Yeah, and your users will be more strict on you because they probably gave you some money on the crowd loan or some other vested interest for you to be able to do that. Also investors. Yeah, and the thing is that you really need a parachain slot or a way to gather money from your to gather money for the para-thread whenever that happens. Yeah, and in the end, the technical complexity is order of magnitude higher than just building a smart contract on anything that you do. So, what should we do? I think we should teach more users about self-custody and responsibility for their assets. We can do that in very nice ways because of the features that we have, and we are still not using them completely. We need to know who are our users, and this is, I think it's important to say that not only end users as we know them that click through app are your users. If you are building a blockchain, you are building a platform for other developers, which are the users, and we should care about them and make their life much more easy, because right now it's not very easy to do that. We should build better wallet APIs and wallets. I'm not saying that we don't have some great wallets. We have Talisman, we have Nova Wallet, which are amazing. I've seen some institutional thing coming from Nova team. But there is much more that you can do. We can do proxy account abstractions on our chains right now, which is a very powerful tool to program the wallet to be able to do only a subset of things, and in a sense protect the user from doing something. We need good hardware wallets, which I think we have. I love how Party Signer works. It needs some improvements, but yeah, it will be great. What we also need is unified XCM APIs. This is one of the main pain points of actual development of the front ends and cross-chain applications, because right now there is nothing that is common. So we are building these asset registries and XCM APIs for each chain. And I think we could abstract it and build it together and join together and finally do something about this. Yeah, and that will allow us to do better cross-chain use cases, because right now, every cross-chain thing that you are doing is very hard. In the end, there is one thing I learned about recently from Brian from Akala. There is this thing called new thing called runtime APIs, which you can do, and this is one of the things that we can do for the developers to make them life easier. So instead of RPCs, there is this thing called runtime APIs. You just call this macro, and you define the interface, and then you just write implementation for it. It can be as simple as that. And what it makes is that it allows you to pull multiple storages at the same time or do any logic inside of it. So instead of front-end developer going and calling 10 different APIs and composing the data in a way that he needs it to display, you just make it for them. And this is very simple, and it's very hard to do in JavaScript itself. Yeah, as I said, we are all building products, and we are not just building greatest new technology out there. We are building tools for other people to build better cross-chain products. So what I think is really important, we should also think about building tooling about this, and the infrastructure for easy data availability. We should definitely knowledge transfer more. This conference is the most amazing conference there is probably for this. I remember first time when I was here in 2019, I think, it was Sub0.1, meeting all of these amazing people, and like my brain blown out, and I wanted to just build here. And I hope that we can continue doing this more often. And yeah. And there is this new thing called Polkadot Forum. Everybody please check out, because there are these topics are also discussed there, and we need more engagement from all of you and coordination, and I think this is the way to do it. So I conducted a survey like a few months before this talk, and I got back something that I slightly expected. So the biggest pain points of the UX of developers and the users is lack of clear instructions and documentation. Yeah, and in comparison to EVM, it's much harder to just get in. It's incomparable. And we need to make it much better. So we also need to build better tooling for developers. One of the things, I don't know if you remember, we did the API Explorer. We just revived it, and it's called API Docs. And what you get is generated front-end app from the node metadata, where you can see nicely all the palettes that you have in the node. You can see their storage. If you click here, you can see like documentations that are in the storage. You see the signature, all the types, and yeah, you can read it and see what it has. We use this heavily on the front ends. We give this to front end developers, and they love it. They just like explore the node and like, oh, this is amazing. And this is open source. I put the link to it. Please contribute to it. It needs a bunch of changes. We didn't have too much time, but I think it will improve how you work with the front-end devs and maybe even like a UX team. Yep. So please contribute to this. We all need to like work together to make the UX better in the ecosystem, because otherwise it will be really scattered, and we cannot push this narrative without deep collaboration and communication. Okay, that's about it. Thank you.
Hello. Oh, yes. Thank you. Thank you. Do you have any questions from the audience? Anyone would like to ask anything about UX or the infrastructure or anything? So no? Perfect. Okay. Then can we get another round of applause for Jakob himself? And
Thanks.
this is his, if you want to contact him or anything, this is his info. Just scan.
This is all the links that are
Yes.
there. So.
Okay. Perfect.
Thanks. I missed the very beginning of the talk, so I skipped the ordering of the transaction. Can you maybe repeat that and tell me what was that about?
Yeah, basically you can save a spot in a block or reorder transactions based on what are your requirements. So for example, if you have a use case that really needs to have some transaction happen, you just say these are always first in the block, and then everything else is going after that. And this is pretty easy to do, actually. So I gave it as a example of how you can improve for the end users. For example, if you are LP or you have a money in some lending platform and the blocks are full and you cannot get out and you get liquidated because of that, you should be maybe able to be first to exit or like pay yourself up. And this is like an example of a UX that we could improve in the ecosystem, yeah, with the tooling that we have.